The time is just gone 11 minutes past 8 a.m. as we kick off this morning, looking at the big picture. And the big picture story this morning is the energy crisis, looking at South Africa, looking at the efforts to tackle the energy crisis. Is there a lack of urgency and coherence? And we're joined by energy expert this morning, Crown Prince Adil Nchabeleng. Uh, Adil, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And as always, an absolute pleasure having you with us here on Assalam Media.
Wa alaikum salam, and thank you so much. It's quite a pleasure for me.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier on, the ESCOM issue, is this ever going to go away, or are we just continuously, beating a dead horse?
I think you just described it as Andre de Ruyter's usually would say that he inherited a dead horse. But I mean, I don't think it's a fact. ESCOM was an incredibly well built machinery. Unfortunately, over the period of time and over the last 3 years, apparently, it's just been a downhill, sort of a steep downhill situation where there wasn't really much done to ensure that you have the optimum performance within ESCOM in terms of its power plants. Remember, we're not struggling with distribution of power in terms of the transmission side of it, pushing power off the power plants into the grid. We're not struggling with the distribution of power at local areas, municipal level, as well as industrial level. The major crisis right now is sitting at generation. Most of the generation plants are sitting as less optimum. I mean, most of them are operating below 50% in terms of energy availability capacity, which means most of the units are non-functional and they are in the breaking stages. And either there is a deliberate move to totally disrupt the provision of power in South Africa, or there is a deliberate move to say that South Africa's capacity to actually self-generate its own electricity is declining. As a result, introduce new suppliers, because sometimes there's always a market force that pushes for this kind of transitions to happen when they see that the natural course is not happening. ESCOM power plants are not in the state where are not repairable. They are repairable, they can be maintained, they can be refurbished, and most of them still have a sizable lifespan where they can actually be extended, those that are supposed to actually be extended or closed down. So the issues are really at management level and key decision making. Right now, it's actually at departmental level between the Department of Public Enterprise, including the ESCOM itself as an entity. Those decisions are made between the two. And, based on what we know so far, is that there is a huge tussle of what should be done. And somehow behind the scene, they're introducing a plan to actually sell off the power plants themselves.
Yes. Now, I think what is important to understand, and when you're talking about a degrading infrastructure at ESCOM, and what could some of the underlying issues be behind those, Adil, and when we're speaking about a deliberate move, and I think there are many that are of the opinion that this is a deliberate move, and there are other agendas that are playing out, considering where we are at this point in time, considering that, we've heard over and over again confidence being expressed in terms of progress. But at the end of the day, even when one looks at issues like the integrated resource plan that was adopted in 2019, now we're talking about a revised plan. And just for how long are we going to revise the plan when there are certain issues, when there are certain deliberate moves, when there are certain agendas playing out, Adil?
Look, I think these plans are going to be continuously revised until there is much. I mean, there is no requirement for a comprehensive planning that is required at a policy level to maintain power plants. These power plants should be running according to power plant managers' plans on their own ground. Right now, we talk about plants that most people don't even know what power plants are. These power plants, where are they situated, who's their managers, who's running the whole schedules of a day to day, who are the CEOs right now of the power plants, because all power plants have their own CEOs, which is power plant managers. But when we talk continuously, we get affected by a situation whereby ESCOM encapsulates the whole air environment and only gives you a version that they have crafted, which is public relations version. It's not a version of going onto the ground and showing you the capacity of these power plants. Most of those power plants are pushing in excess of 2,000 megawatts. And nobody gives you a breakdown of the exact amount of energy created at each power plant. Right now, we should be speaking to all power plant managers and having them account to say, listen, on this power plant, my role being the fact that I'm the CEO, I've been responsible for generating 2,000, 3,000, whatever megawatts it is. And we've had this one or two, three issues, but at the same time, we are busy working this particular plan. But right now, you don't get any of that. You get executives version who are not involved at the site, who are not involved on ground, who are not involved on day-to-day basis. All that they get is reports to say that this particular power plant is tripped, and as a result, they are undergoing, sort of maintenance. They're undergoing an unscheduled breakdown. What do you call it? As a repairs process. So we really need to get to the nuts and bolts of everything in South Africa, whereby there has to be accountability. Right now, I don't think there is clarity on accountability, because you cannot have a situation whereby all power plants in South Africa are already in a broken state and are functioning in a non-optimum level, where they are not producing the electricity that they're supposed to be producing. And so far, all we hear is just a public relations version of it, that there will be load shedding due to the fact that there's a huge demand onto the electricity grid. The demand has always been there. This particular grid has been built for particular demand. So demand has never been the problem. The problem has been the optimal functioning of the power plants.
Yes. Now, also getting to the nuts and bolts and looking at the leadership. And
Mm.
this is of concern because we cannot resolve this pressing energy crisis where we've seen over and over again, even senior government figures who seem to be openly disagreeing on the way forward. So even if we have got the plan, even if there is an integrated resource plan, at the end of the day, it is about the adoption of the plan, but more importantly, the leadership. And a leadership we know is in crisis, and especially when they are in disagreement, when they have absolutely no confidence amongst themselves in taking certain decisions to find a way forward, Adil.
Yeah, it's quite a quagmire right now. There's no leadership at all. I mean, as we have already stated, that unfortunately, Andre the Reuters has failed, and as a result of his failure, we are unable right now to have something that is at an optimal level. Instead, his focus has been mainly to drive his agenda, particularly being the agenda to go all over the world and raise money to focus on a different program, which is completely non-related towards ESCOM's problem, which is maintenance, repairs, as well as ensuring that ESCOM is actually given his capacity to operate the power stations. He's gone off overseas. He goes all over the world, speaking to World Bank, speaking to all the various institutions, getting involved with the COP17 discussions in order to move ESCOM away from its core power generation capacity, which is its base load. Base load meaning the capacity of electricity to be produced on a 24-hour basis at 100% capacity, based on the power plants that are coal as well as nuclear in South Africa, and the other alternative storage such as your hydro, as well as the other incoming renewables into the grid. But his focus says that they want to shut down power stations, move away from coal, and as a result, introduce, the intermittent alternative renewables, which is your solar and wind. And knowing the fundamentals of electricity, we are not an economy that can rely at any level on any of the sources, whether it is solar or wind, because it is an intermittent. It's available as and when available, and has no firm capacity, which means firm that on the basis that whenever the sun rises as well as the wind blows, you get your electricity and it shoots up into the grid, and most likely it's unusable, because ESCOM still has to run its own picker plants in order to balance the electricity that is coming in. And then on the other side of it is you have your power plants, which are currently being running on a coal level, on a nuclear level. When some of these alternatives come in, they become disruptive to the network, and the power plants have to be ramped down, which means their production capacity has to be slower down. And when the electricity is not available on alternatives, your solar and wind, and then they have to ramp up, which is your current power plants, your coal plants, as well as the other nuclear plants. So This is a quite disruptive process that has been introduced, unusable currently in the current energy scope. And ESCOM is struggling a lot because now there is a different strategic approach that is tearing up the company. We want to introduce new alternatives. On the one side, you have these power plants that are breaking down, and there is no focus on maintenance, there's no focus on producing electricity that is required, and it becomes a political quagmire. The current program to destroy the power plants is deliberate, has no mandate whatsoever, except by various individuals and interests that are mainly global and South African funded institutions, such as your NGOs, as well as the cabals that are enjoying, earning a huge premium and out of introducing the independent power producer program. And that's what has been happening in South Africa. And when you say these things, everybody makes it as if it's like some kind of a conspiracy when there is no conspiracy. There's effects in the market, there's effects in the industry that we know that there are people who have already positioned themselves to make an obscene amount of money from moving ESCOM away from its core focus, which is to produce electricity, to dismantling that core focus and then creating themselves a dividend out of being the suppliers of electricity in South Africa.
Yes, and also what it's important to understand is, the deliberate mismanagement. We speaking about we are maintenance and the necessary maintenance that is not being carried out, and also a lack of maintenance, and this is obviously disrupting the electricity supply. And how much of this could be a deliberate move? Because we've heard of stories about sabotage, for instance, even to the extent that coal being mixed with metal and the like, to basically destroy the power generating capacity. Just your thoughts on this, in terms of this deliberate move, and more importantly, talking about sabotage or the possibility of sabotage taking place, Adil.
The sabotage right now is actually at executive level. At power stations level, over the last few months, almost a year now, we haven't heard of any incidents whereby there has been deliberate destruction, which is destroying infrastructure. In the past, there has been, some kind of a sabotage element whereby we heard that there were individuals who would go into power stations and go in and break certain technical equipments, your technology. They would break in and make sure that they destroy things like your conveyor belts. They would destroy, cable and all of those things. They will destroy infrastructure of your, transmission infrastructure that takes energy from the power plant and then push it out. But right now, at the stage that we're in, I mean, we even had fires at the various power plants like your Midupi and Kusile, where there was major unit fires, where major units of boilers and stuff went up into fire and were really destroyed dismally. But that era, I think, has completely phased out, where over the last year it has been stabilized. But what we've seen now is either there is a cogent move within ESCOM to say our focus should dramatically shift from relying on current coal power plants and then move into the so-called renewable space, which, as I explained, it's not possible at the stage. The technology is not yet ready to even do that kind of a migration. Instead, efforts should have been made to sustain the current power plants and increase their life span in terms of ensuring that they are extended in terms of operational licensing. But the deliberate move right now is ESCOM is shutting down those power plants deliberately, and some of them there is no programs on repairs and maintenance.
Yes, Adil, we're going to go for an air break. I'm going to put you on hold. We'll be back in a minute or two.
In the smell of black seed oil being applied by my nani. Now I'm using Tib black seed in my own home to soothe sniffles and coughs, to help with digestion and immunity, and of course, as part of my beauty routine. After all these years, I've come to appreciate the wisdom in finding comfort and shifa in trusted treatments like Tib black seed. You can find Tib black seed at all leading pharmacies or find out more at blackseed.co.za.
One of the most important things you can do on this earth is to let people know they are not alone. That the frustration of communities who struggle to earn the very basic will not they cry alone. Discharging the zakah is the starting point for creating a sustainable community and taking action. It's the impetus for creating lasting change and hope. Donate your zakah to the Al Fida Foundation, supporting over 10,000 Muslim families in the Eastern and Western Cape of South Africa. We need your help to assist our neighbors of need. Contact the Al Fida Foundation at 041 484 1288 or visit our website at www.alfida.co.za. The Al Fida Foundation, your partner in social investment.
At Sentio, our Invest for Good philosophy is based on a real desire to use our investment skills for the benefit of broader society. We are committed to supporting our community by investing responsibly, giving charitably, and developing talent that will transform the investment industry. As an ethically based asset manager, we are focused on delivering superior risk-adjusted returns for our clients, regardless of market conditions. Visit us at www.sentio-capital.com for more information on our Sharia investment products and start saving with us today. Sentio Capital Management. Invest for good. Sentio Capital Management is an authorized financial services provider. Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media, your humanitarian broadcaster.
The time is just gone 28 minutes past 8 a.m. and we are looking at the big picture this morning. And the big picture is ESCOM and South Africa's efforts or the lack of efforts in tackling the energy crisis. We know there is huge anger, there is frustration among the public. It is clearly handicapping a business, the productivity, and this crisis. At the end of the day, people have been watching and also looking at the government strategically looking at their implementation. We've heard about these plans over and over again, and looking at the energy plan, Adil. And we know that in 2021, the State of the Nation address by President Cyril Ramaphosa, he spoke about the procurement of the first and second sets of renewable energy developments. They would commence in August 2021. They say that the first target was achieved. Looking at the second target that was already postponed twice in January and in March. And at the end of the day, it does appear, and when I say the buck stops at the top, looking at the president himself, there have been many an occasion where he's now trying to stay clear of certain controversial energy developments and decisions as well.
Absolutely. But look, it's never been the president's prerogative to be involved at any level of power station process. He's got executives there. He's got a minister of energy. He's got a minister of public enterprise who the buck should be stopping at. But I mean, it's been quite a very strange scenario seeing the president trying to justify some of the wrongs that has been happening within ESCOM. And I think over the past 3 years, he did take a decision to gradually withdraw out of the conversation. You haven't seen him making many comments, except just generic, economic comments around the struggles of the economy due to electricity. But in terms of the ESCOM internal mantling, the president should be totally discouraged, should be totally disallowed from being involved in mantling in any of the processes as to what is happening, given the fact that it's not particularly his area of expertise nor scope. Even if he wishes to give an input into it, the input might be wishful to a point where even, he gives whatever input, it might be destructive towards the organization. So the unfortunate situation is there's a strong protection lobby against holding the likes of Andre de Reuters, the COO, accountable in terms of their operational responsibility. There is a strong resistance as well in terms of holding the board responsible. And that's what we have seen, because the president has created two teams within his own core at his own department, where you have advisory teams that are advising him on the level of what should be happening at ESCOM. And then you have another advisory team that specializes on just giving inputs into what should be happening in terms of the renewables development model and everything. And these teams have not been useful. I mean, since ever they've been given the committees, since they've been given the mandate to operate, they've been more destructive than actually useful within the context of what we're doing. Let me give you a picture, a small little picture of what we're dealing with. Here's a list, about 40, a basic list in terms of the capacity of power plants generation. In South Africa, coal is producing over 40,000 megawatts. Gas turbines, which is supposed to be now LNG gas as well as the available gas, is currently using diesel, which they actually, they call gas turbines, is producing 3,449 megawatts. Hydro is your plants that are based in terms of the hydro plants, which is your battery storage, where they do dams. In those dams, they create a generation to peak whenever is required. Is producing at 3.5 thousand megawatts, right? Your wind electricity right now coming into the grid is about 2,000 megawatts. Nuclear is at 1,800 megawatts. Solar panels right now in the country is producing at about 1,400 megawatts. And then solar CSP, which is concentrated solar power, is at about 400. Landfill gas, which is about 75 megawatts, 75 megawatts. So if you look at all of those, and they have imported hydro, which is the Kahora Basa line, that is a very important line that helps keep, load shedding off our base, which is currently based on 1,500. If you look at that capacity, it makes up what we're sitting with in terms of the whole generation scope of Eskom's capacity to generate electricity. So what we tend to forget is the main concentration right now of our power plants are at coal level. And that is why there is not much discussion you can have on any other source right now when the major capacity of our power generation fleet is coal. Instead of saying, what do we need to do to fix up this coal and bring it up to its capacity? Right now, if coal is at 40,000 megawatts, and South Africa is sitting at 30,000 megawatts, which means already 10,000 to 15,000 megawatts of coal-based electricity is already off the grid on the basis that it's broken down, on the basis that it's currently been fixed and repaired, And now, coming back again, you have 15 odd power plants and power stations that are running, from Arnott Power Station, Camden Power Station, the Duva Power Station, you've got the Grootvlei Power Station, the Hendrina Power Station itself, you've got Kelvin Power Station, the Kendall Power Station, you've got Komati Power Station, the Kriel Power Station, Kusile Power Station, and I'm naming this so that people get to understand the ins and outs of Eskom. You've got the Letabo Power Station, Majuba Power Station, Matimba Power Station itself, and the Matla Power Station, Midupi Power Station. And then in the east of Pretoria, there is another power station that is run currently by the city of Tshwane, which is called the Pretoria West Power Station. There is the Rooival Power Station and the Tutuka Power Station. All these power stations in combination produce about 40,000 nameplate capacity. When I say 40,000 does not mean on a daily basis they are all pushing out 40,000 equally. No, it's nameplate, which means the level of electricity these power stations can reach. At this stage, these power stations are not able, none of them are currently at an optimal functioning level to produce that amount of electricity. The biggest right now power station that is producing the most power is Tutuka Power Station at 3,654 megawatts. The second most, actually, the Letabo Power Station is the largest, right? You've got Matimba producing 3,900. You've got the Letabo Power Station producing 3,708 megawatts. You've got the Matla Power Station producing 3,600. And then you've got Tutuka Power Station producing 3,654. And the largest of them all being the Kendall Power Station is pushing out 4,116 megawatts. So you can see the most important ones are those with the largest capacity. The Arnott Power Station itself is producing 2,352. So giving you the picture, the Duva Power Station itself, again, 3,600. So this is where the focus should have been at. Kusile right now sits at a nameplate of 4,800 megawatts. And right now, that 3,000 The 4,800 megawatts is not currently, being able on Kusile to be produced fully at capacity. And then now you have
Exactly.
the least one, which is your Midupi, producing about, it's supposed to do 4,700, but we're only getting about 5,000, 1,588 if it is completed properly. So I'm just giving you an understanding of what is possibly capable of these power stations, the top rated, the most ranked. And understanding this is fundamental. And these power stations, by the way, are distributed throughout the country in IOT. They are based in provinces, and those provinces are looking after these power stations in terms of their location. And it's part of what we call a national key points, which means it's protected by the state under the military code, as well as the South African services on intelligence services, including the security services of South Africa.
Yes. Now, I understand, in fact, and I appreciate the fact that you've given us this breakdown, which tells us, Ariel, that there is no shortage of capacity in this country if these power stations are managed and they run at the levels they should be running at. And you mentioned two of them, Kusile and
Midupi.
Madupi. And, there was a lot of hope, there was a lot of reliance on the completion of both Kusile and Madupi. And we've seen the massive delays, we've seen cost overruns. And what we're saying is these are relatively new power stations where one cannot even now explain breakdowns with brand new machinery that has been installed in these power stations.
Absolutely, and look, they can explain, but they are being very dicey, which is the executive management of ESCOM, and they have a very strong, effective public relations machinery where there's been a coordinated effort between journalists, media, playing the cover-up game, which is the people who are usually the usual suspect, the journalists who are actually capturing all the data on what is currently happening in ESCOM, and they play the power game in sense that they actually even go as far as blocking any negative views and reviews against ESCOM, against ESCOM's executive, against any criticism towards the mismanagement of ESCOM for coming out of the public. So people who are outspoken, who are going to be saying things that are undesirable, media completely just puts up a blanket. I mean, I'm one of those that right now, whenever I come out on television, you know, literally producers will get a call and be told that why are you bringing in Adil, knowing that his views are going to create a certain stare in the public, which is supposed to happen because our job is to hold our executives accountable. We're not fighting against individuals. We're fighting against the fact that our state should be operating at an optimal level. And if we don't hold these executives accountable, we will have a failed state, a complete banana republic. But we have journalists now that are working and are embedded on the basis of protecting the current status quo of the failure of the state. And they are working in newsrooms, they are working in journalist institutions like your newspapers as well as broadcasters. And all that they are doing is to ensure that they can put down a damper on anything that is reviewed as negative. Your station, for instance, Salam Media, is one of the most really appreciated platform because it is not censored in the same way that you would have censoring happening in public as well as a private owned media platforms, and we appreciate that about it, but in terms of the mainstream is currently part of the embedded front line of the public relations mechanism that is stopping any input that is going to bring about what should be changed and what should be held accountable, particularly within the ESCOM, the executives, the ministers responsible, as well as the teams that are in charge of those power stations. Right now, we should be questioning each and every power station manager what is currently happening at power stations levels, and they should be coming out publicly. But whenever you see the press conferences, the public relation exercises that they do to literally give us false hope, you will never hear any input coming out of power stations and giving in their own frustrational inputs on what is currently happening. And that actually should be brought to the fore.
Yes. Just one other thing I'd like to talk about is looking at our relationship with some of the global players as far as power generation goes. And in particular, I'd like to refer to Russia, because in the
Mm.
past we've heard all this talk about Russia, and just your thoughts as to where we are at this point in time. And I think more importantly, to understand what would some of the consequences be, Adil, in our relationship with Russia, in getting involved in energy, and particularly looking at nuclear energy.
Right now, the whole relations between South Africa and Russia's bilateral agreement has been completely sort of minimized since the creation of that whole nuclear scare, when they said that South Africa is selling off its power sovereignty over to Russia during former President Jacob Zuma, when he was still president, and there was a high court decision that said that the parliament should stop any process around nuclear, and they should go back into consultation. But that whole thing was actually a whole stimulated because the High Court doesn't understand the fundamentals of energy and nuclear. By now, South Africa made the biggest mistake. By now, they should have built those 10,000 megawatts power station. Between the time this deal started to today, we would have already had some level of energy capacity coming out of nuclear. And the amount of money, even if it was a trillion, it would have been nothing in compared to the amount of money wasted on IPPs, which is completed right now at over 1.4 trillion rands spent on a program. Eskom has already paid over 300 billion today into IPPs that are not even producing electricity that is being used. So if you start comparing apples and apples, you start seeing the fundamentals are not correct. Unfortunately, that plan was disrupted, whereby South Africa could have built a very strong bilateral relationship with Russia to help South Africa's nuclear industry develop and grow. But what we're seeing is there's been a decline. And I'm quite now even impressed by the pushback right now being actually, where Minister Gwede Mantashe has been holding the fort and saying, listen, as much as I'm being hated and I'll be hated for my views, I am not going to back down on the element of protecting South Africa's interest and aspect of making sure that nuclear energy becomes one of the core competency in terms of our migration towards cleaner energy. Because as you know, nuclear is the most clean. It's better than wind, it's better than solar, it's better than any other source, by the way. Even gas cannot reach the level of nuclear's zero carbon, no emission, none of it actually produces any environmental hazard. The only problem around nuclear with global movements is that they are scared of its capacity or countries' capacity to do high enrichment, which is now producing, weapon level capacity. South Africa has no interest in high enrichment. They're only focusing on low enrichment, which is research based and which is energy based production of electricity. So on those two, this capacity would take South Africa into another highest level of development. By the way, the GDP contribution of nuclear, if we had built this 10,000 megawatts capacity, 2 to 3% of our GDP increasement in terms of percentage would have been increased in our economy. These are some of the things that they don't want to see, because it will take South Africa from its current ailing economy to an gradually, sort of improving and steadily, growing economy at a 3% rate to the current GDP. So you're adding an additional 3% rate. So reaching certain levels of economic growth are possible, but the decisions have been hampered. And that whole, nuclear scare against South Africa with Russia was done deliberately and was done by malice and was done by people who knew that there was nothing wrong in the deal. If they had complained about the fact that there was levels of mangling and corruption, no, deals are done everywhere. The president went and did a deal with COP17 to shut down coal power plants. Why did people not actually start naming that as a corrupt deal? So deals are done by the head of states on a regular basis, but there seem to be a trend whereby not all animals are equal. Some animals are more equal than others, and some are protected by institution and the state and the establishment. And as we have seen in the current reign of President Cyril Ramaphosa, he's the most highly protected, highly shielded and guarded president. There is nothing you could say or even highlight in terms of their mismanagement, inability to be held accountable, that the media would actually take seriously. They cover it up as much as possible, and as a result, yet we're supposed to be having the opposite. A leader is a leader of a state and a nation, and the people must be given the right to complain. That is why people like us, I have nothing against the president, Cyril Ramaphosa, but where I find it that it's against our moral rule and obligation to be sitting quiet. I will speak out, and we will be unfortunately unfamous, but we're not interested in fame because we are held accountable by a creator who's greater than any other person created on earth. So our qualms are not with people, but are with principles, and are with moral obligation, and are with the aspect of what we should be doing to grow our economy. South Africa is declining economically due to electricity. Every time there's a load shedding, people's jobs, people's income, people's livelihoods and lifestyles are affected dismally, to the point where we are even killing an economy. Is that acceptable according to any Islamic principle? No, it's not acceptable. So we're speaking out for that reason. And if it is not any other reason, we don't have any problem. These are people that we know, and power comes and goes. And maybe in the next 5 years, we won't be complaining about Cyril Ramaphosa. There will be another president in place who would be doing something else that is different. So we don't know. But at the same time, we cannot sit quiet in the situation that is happening. ESCOM is repairable. ESCOM can be refurbished. ESCOM can be brought back to its capacity, but the decision makers are not interested in making that possible.
Well, Crown Prince Adil Nchabeleng, I must say, Jazakallah khairan so much. As always, we do appreciate your time, and we salute you for your courage, for your bravery in speaking out, and in unpacking the issues surrounding the energy crisis that the country is facing. And looking forward to engaging with you as we have been through the last few years, and we wish you well, inshallah. Allah keep you safe, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam, and thank you so much.
Crown Prince Adil Nchabeleng with us this morning on the big picture is South Africa. What needs to be done to resolve the energy crisis in the country, which brings us straight on to 8:48. And when we come back, it's a weekly edition of Crime Talk with Etiquini Secure. We will be talking with Chairperson Imtiaz Sayed himself.